In the past few days, I've been thinking a lot about a quote by the science fiction author Philip K. Dick. He was asked about writing good science fiction and fantasy stories, and indeed I think his response speaks to fiction in general. He said that a story should be a story well told, and that one needn't know a whole lot about the author. And in fact, the author ought not try and jam in a bunch of their political and religious points of view, propaganda inserted into the story. He stipulated that he knew almost no authors who actually did this, himself included. He said he could think of, off the top of his head, only one author who told great stories, well told, and after reading them, he didn't know anything about this person's religious or political points of view, and that person was Ray Bradbury. We shall return to this point in a moment. Our topic this time is Ray Bradbury's relevance today. Following very closely on the heels of the death of the man himself, a very sad loss for us and for our civilization. He really was, I feel I can say with no fear, one of the great heroes of America. In a time when we're famished for such things, I'm not sure I can think of a living great American hero that we have left, except for John Waters. So many people I know have stories where they met or encountered Ray Bradbury in some instance, and he said or did something that inspired an idea, sparked their imagination, gave them encouragement. He seems to have been this saint who went around doing these things. And these stories that people have are wonderful things. You have your story about when you stood in line at a book signing and you had your 20 seconds with Ray Bradbury and he said something to you that really encouraged you and inspired your imagination and changed your life. That is a wonderful thing, and you ought to keep that in your heart, and you ought to let that work on you and change you, and you ought to tell that story. However, that is your story, and 1,000 years from now, I'm not sure that these stories are going to survive. We look at people 1,000 years ago, even some of the most important people, and we know so little about their day-to-day lives and experiences. Even in this age of rampant recording and reporting, I'm just not sure that these stories will exist in the mists of time. In fact, I'm not even sure some of the published things will survive. I'm not sure that 1,000 years from now people will be reading Let's All Kill Constance. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that 1,000 years from now people will be reading a chapbook for burnt-out priests, rabbis, and ministers. It was printed on such a small press that it's difficult to find even today, which is unfortunate because it is a wonderful book. However, I feel fairly certain that 1,000 years from now people will be reading Fahrenheit 451. There's a reason for that. Another thing that Philip K. Dick said was that good science fiction, or fantasy or fiction in general, ought to be about what it means to be human, even if the story is about fungus on the surface of the planet Venus. Some people might argue that Ray Bradbury never wrote a science fiction story in his life, for the reason that his stories were very much about what it was like to be human. One of the things that's bothered me so much about the reporting of Ray Bradbury's death, I've heard this from several sources, several different reporters saying that Fahrenheit 451 is a book about government censorship. It is not a book about government censorship. It's a book about a society that decides that it values entertainment and self-interest far more than it values the sharing of ideas, and decides as a society to burn all of books, that nobody should own them, nobody should read them, and so we're going to burn them all. This kind of anti-intellectualism, I think, is a danger for any civilization, especially one that has reached a point of heightened luxury in the common people. Another way in which he talks about the common human experience so much in his work. I think about my own childhood, and I think about the story All Summer in a Day. Those children are some of the most real children I have ever read. They are absolute beasts, and in fact we've seen the children from All Summer in a Day manifest recently in a video that went viral of a bus driver being mocked by the children on the bus. These are ways in which humans act, and we ought to continue to talk about this. One of the returning to the subject of the allegation that he never wrote a science fiction story, which I'm inclined to at least agree that these genre distinctions are unhelpful. I think that it's a good thing that Ray Bradbury was far more of a poet than a hard scientist. So often one finds that somebody who's writing about future science, well, inevitably the future ends up happening, and their ideas tend to look very dated. So I think he, by his personality and values, dodged a bullet there. Another way in which I think he's relevant today are some of the unseen ways. He was a tremendous influence, and in fact a collaborator with several of the great people of the 20th century. John Huston, Walt Disney, Rod Serling, and hundreds of luminaries I know cite him as a tremendous influence on them. As with anything, one of my hobby horses is ideas, and I think that great people talk and care about ideas far more than anything else. One of the books that I have recommended elsewhere and will recommend again that you run out and buy is Yestermorrow, a book of essays by Mr. Bradbury. The breadth of the subject included is broad. He talks about architecture, city planning, arts, and sculpture, many things. It's a beautiful book. Another great contribution that he made in the nonfiction world is Zen in the Art of Writing, which is, for my money, one of the best books about writing out there, and I've read an awful lot of books about writing. I'm hard-pressed to think of anybody who could get through that book without being on fire to go write. It is such an inspirational book. I think that, again, in the future, the man himself, it was important that he lived, but it is the body of work that, as Mr. Electro, the carnival performer, said to a young Ray Bradbury some years ago at this point, that is the part of him which I think will live forever. I apologize for the fanboy gushing that this one's turned out to be. Actually, I don't apologize for that. I don't think Mr. Bradbury would want me to apologize for that. I think that we ought to love the things that we love unapologetically. That is another way in which I think that he is eminently relevant today. Ta-ta.